David versus Goliath comes back to the country. That's powerful. Hey viewers, today we're here with Citlali, Citlamina, Anahuac. Good evening, Citlali. How are you doing today?
Good evening, Gabriel. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. So where are you zooming in from today?
I am live and direct from Anaheim, California.
Great. Now, can you tell us where you're exactly sitting in right now? Because if you're a viewer, you're looking at the background and saying, what does she have in that background?
I have a newborn child, and this is his room. So that's why you see the luchadora mask back there and his bassinets right here. So this is my mom corner.
All right. Well, Citlali, you have a lot of viewers, and we met because you do a lot of TikTok commentary. This is a fusion here of TikTok meets YouTube meets East Los Angeles College Chicano studies and the whole thing. So we're connecting it for the audience. So Citlali, let's get into it. So you have a master's in history, correct?
That's correct.
All right, from Cal State LA, and you have a long trajectory of being an activist, but not just an activist, but you have opinions, you have a lot of thoughts, and you're sharing them on YouTube and TikTok. And one of the themes that you have, and I want viewers to know that we're going to be talking about identity here. We're not shying away from the issue of identity. And one of the things that I could say, tell me if I'm incorrect here, is that you say you are not a Latina.
That is correct, 100%.
Okay. We're going to unpack that. Tell me why you say you're not a Latina. What terminology do you prefer? And educate the audience.
Well, for the last 24 years, I came across the deconstruction of the term Latino. And as a young Mexicana from LA, I started learning about my history and a decolonial, view and approach to history. And so I learned that Latin or Latinos are the Southern Europeans, and the process of how Latin was used in so-called Latin America, and then how it became a marketing label in the 70s. And the way that I view it, it's a very, very genocidal term that seeks to erase Black, Indigenous people of color. It seeks to homogenize us and to flatten out our diversity. And especially for the marketing element of it, they want to exploit our demographics. And so with myself, I was like, you know what? I'm not a Southern European. The language that I speak, I'm not speaking Latin. I'm not a Roman. And so in the process of trying to reconnect with my ancestry, with my indigenous ancestry, I said, I have to refuse these colonial terms. And I've been in resistance since 1997, and I've seen how it's been transformed and how it's still being heavily used in mainstream media. So I want to let people know that Latino has nothing to do with our culture. That, like, for example, I'm speaking English right now. And the majority of the times I speak English, that doesn't make me Britannic, right? Or if I had an English surname, right, that doesn't make me part of that culture or the ethnicity that comes from that language base. And that's what I try to recover, and I try to let people know that there's so much history to us. There's so much diversity. There's so much indigenous cultures that have to be reclaimed and have to be celebrated, because in this narrative of the U.S., this narrative of white supremacy, of Eurocentric thought, there's no room for celebrating indigenous culture and identities. And we're all just exploited. We're all homogenized. They want to flatten out who we are. And that's taking away our power. We have a lot of demographic power. We have a lot of buying power. And so, like many people have said, we're the sleeping giant. And so part of the work that I do is I want to wake up that giant. We're actually a few giants, not just one big giant, but there's massive numbers of us. And so there's so many opportunity for us to reclaim who we are economically, culturally, linguistically. It's limitless, the way that we can reconstruct and recover our massive identities that have been erased by these colonial terms like Hispanic, like Latina.
So, Citlali, and viewers, one of the things that people say, Mexicans never cooperate. We're like crabs, and the whole thing. So, this is an example of Citlali has a YouTube channel, and it's called Mexican Excellence. I want you to do a search on YouTube. Go to Mexican Excellence and subscribe. I'm going to be on her YouTube channel. She's going to be asking me questions, but we're also both educators. And in that, we want you to ask questions. Put a question in the comment section. And when we do an interview on when Citlali interviews me on her show, we can answer some of those questions because we want that interaction with you. So no more break here. So Citlali, you use the word we. And I want to get to ask you the question when you say we have a lot of buying power. So in the United States, you have 60 million persons that fall under the category of Latino. In the United States, you have approximately 40 million of those 60 that are of Mexican descent. And people of Mexican descent have a lot of terms that they use. They use Mexican, Mexicano, Mexican American, Chicano, of Mexican descent, a lot of different words, right? So you have the specific. Are you against using the pan-ethnic terms, any pan-ethnic term, or do you believe that folks should just go straight to the immediate, to the Mexican, to the Salvadorian, to the Nicaraguan, to the Cuban, to the South American? What is your view of these pan-ethnic terms?
Well, my problem with the pan-ethnic term like Latino was its rooted intentions, right? In the studies that I've made, I learned that it was Cuban American executives that actually tailored this term as a way to market our big population, right? And the so-called Latin American identities and homogenize them to one. So my question is always, why do we need a pan-ethnic term? Why do they have to group us all together? I don't understand why, and it comes from the capitalistic thinking of like branding things and making it easier, right, to market. And so I'm not comfortable with trying to find an alternative term or a substitute term. I think if you're Mexican, you're Mexican. And most people that you speak to, they don't say I'm Latina. Like if I speak to my neighbor and she's from El Salvador, she's not going to tell me she's Latina. She's going to say I'm Salvadorian. If you're from Nicaragua, if you're from Puerto Rico, I think the diversity and the beauty of our cultures has been really, really overlooked and diminished by the pan-ethnic term like Latino. So when I go speak at conferences or I speak at schools, I say Mexican, Central American, South American community. It depends on the context of who I'm speaking to. If they want to talk about group us all together, you could say Spanish speaking population, but then a lot of us that have Spanish surnames don't speak Spanish. So
and they're the indigenous languages.
Exactly. So to me, I refuse to participate in this. Oh, let's just get another term. Because again, that whole problem is that we're being grouped and, in a sardine, right, about a melting pot. And to me, I don't see this as a melting pot. I see this as a burning pot, right? They're putting all these ingredients in and stripping us of our diversity. We have so many unique traits, right? Like I said in one of my videos, this Latino term, it forces a unity that is not there. And I don't feel bad for saying that, right? Like if a white Argentinian, speaks to a full-blooded indigenous person from Guatemala, just because they speak Spanish, therefore they're united, or they should have some type of unity, then we should say that for everyone who speaks English. Every person of color who speaks English, then there should be a Britannic model, then there should be a Britannic community. And it doesn't exist because it doesn't serve a capital, marketing purpose. And so to me, I think we should be respected for our differences. We should honor all Mexican, Central American, South American. We're not a homogenous group of people. Just because we speak Spanish doesn't make us all the same people. And I think that pan-ethnic terms, they really do a disservice because they don't take into account the socioeconomic status. They don't talk about the poverty levels. They don't talk about education. You're not hitting all the markers that are, powerful to those groups. It's making it seem like everyone that speaks Spanish is all the same. They all have the same interests. They're all going to buy the same products. They're all going to participate in this policy or in this politician. And it doesn't work like that. We can't make it that easy for politicians and for governments to say that they have us in their pocket, because they don't. They should take the time to study our communities for their diversity, for their unique traits, and they have work to do. They can't just group us all together and, call it a day and walk away with profits, and us not understanding the power of our identity and the power of our demographics.
So, Citlali, so some of them who are in favor of the panethnic will say, the numbers bring us together. And you in fact are doing what you're claiming you're against. You are using Mexican as a term, as a nationalistic term. You are recognizing boundaries, and in fact, this Latinidad is doing exactly what you're saying you want to do, which is bring all these folks together. And tell me why they are either correct or incorrect.
Well, Latinidad in itself is a white supremacist concept. It's anti-indigenous, it's anti-Black. It completely promotes and centralizes whiteness, white culture, white language. And you're absolutely right. By using Mexican, even I have a post that I explain this, because I changed my channel to Mexican Excellence. It used to be called Nicantlaca, Indigenous Women Warriors, but no one understands what Nicantlaca is. No one's going to want to watch my videos. So I purposely said, you know what? I want to market, I want to get my people that are considered Mexican, we can start having this conversation. If you look at my posts, I understand that the Mexican flag, the Mexican government is problematic. It also homogenizes a bunch of indigenous groups under the term of Mexican. But to me, it's how I'm beginning. And to me, there's a long way for me to go. But this is the approach that I'm taking, because that's the population. That's what I know as a Mexican growing up. And that's who people, when they see my channel, when they see my posts, that's what they're familiar with. So to me, it's closer to a good introduction for them. Once they see the name, they go to my channel, then they're going to learn, oh, wow, like she's talking about, we're not Hispanic, we're not Latino, even Mexican is being challenged. But for me, the entryway is saying Mexican. So I'm definitely aware with the problematic. And if all the terms that I use, I've had a lot of posts where I'm like, even the term indigenous, I find problematic, and Mexican. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to be practical. I'm trying to open a door for people and expose them to topics and points of views that are not, part of the mainstream narrative, that are not being taught in K through 12. So that's the purposeful intention that I'm taking it, absolutely. And if you look at the term Mexican, if we look at the other perspective of it, Mexican comes from the word Mexica. Mexica was the name for the so-called Aztecs. The correct term was Mexica. Mexicano, some argue, came from that as well. So it's a little bit closer to an indigenous identity than Latino or Latinidad.
Right. I mean, the term Mexico is an indigenous term. I mean, there's no way to say Mexico is a term that comes from Spaniard other than pronouncing in Spanish, but because the correct pronunciation would be Mexico. Right. But to your point, in California, right now, I'm in Los Angeles, you're in Anaheim. California is a problem, to use the word, the pan-ethnic term, Latino, 80% of that is of Mexican descent. In Arizona, it's 90%. In Texas, the same thing. What is very interesting that I found is that I'm an attorney as well. Only 5% of the attorneys in California are of Latin American origin. Okay. So what's very interesting is that as this overall pan-ethnic group, Latinos are now a vast majority, and between Mexican and Central American, it's around 90 to 95%, to your point. But what I've gotten, and what some marketers and even political consultants that I've talked to are saying is, you have to be specific with folks. When you are communicating with them, you shouldn't use language where they have to code switch in order to communicate with them. Is that ultimately, you're saying that in order to communicate properly to this group, then you have to speak to them and not use this language where people may not be rude and say, don't call me Latina, don't call me Hispanic, but they truly won't pay attention to you? Is that where you're getting at?
Well, I'm trying to just, it's very simple, right? Like I said, if you're Mexican, Chicano, third, fourth generation. To me, that's what I'm talking about. Mexican, Central America. If you're from Salvador, and I think if we get lost in these terms that were created from basically the government imposed on us, the rest of the population, I think we don't have control, we don't have power in that say. And like you're saying, the demographics, our population, we're going to be, in some cases, we are the majority, right? But if you look at the power structure within the next 50 years, we're going to be the majority, over 110 million or so. I saw some reports. It's like, what does that mean if we don't start connecting to who we are and our different identities? What does that mean to our future? Are we going to just be, Europeanized Mexicans or Salvadorians in power, not having control of our resources, of the mainstream media? So I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of the fact that we are going to be the majority without knowing our identity and our history. That's very dangerous for our population, because that just shows that we're not aware of our power. And that's everything that I talk about, is how do we regain our power? How do we regain our economic power? How do we regain our financial, our cultural? There's so much power that we don't know we even have, because we're confused with these terms. So, like, to answer your question, I think let's keep it simple. Mexican, Central American, South American. People don't want to be called that. Okay, let me know. But for me to call everyone Latino, because that's the term that was given to me, and that to me, first of all, it's a European word. I'm using a European word to describe, tons of Black and brown people that speak the Spanish language. To me, it's a disservice to our ancestors. It's a disservice to all resistance movements, all the activists that fought hard, 70s and 80s. There's been a lot of people fighting against these terms. Even the term Hispanic, a lot of people in the 80s were protesting this. So there's a lot of people that are aware of this and who have been in resistance, who have, worked with the census, who are trying to tell them, even the original term Hispanic, my studies for what I learned about it, and this is a great book, by the way. It's called...
Oh, I have it too. Christina Mora.
Yes. And he talks about that, right? It's like that Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban activists went to the Bureau and said, we're not white, because we were all categorized as white under the white umbrella before. And so to get our resources and to tailor to our communities for better services, they said, we need something. And the Bureau refused to call the Mexican, Puerto Rican, and Cuban. They said, no, we need something more general. Hence came the term Hispanic. So even that in itself, before even being called Hispanic or being distinguished from whiteness, there's a whole trajectory to that. And to me, that's what's so fascinating as a historian, is that we don't know that. We don't know that. Like, when I was born in Martin Luther King Hospital in Los Angeles, and on my card, the Martin Luther King card, it says white. My mom's card says white. And I'm like, that was the binary of the 80s, where it was black and white. There was no anything else that existed. And so to me, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Is part of, if you're a listener, you might be thinking, why are these two individuals just so obsessed with the question of identity? And to the viewer, I would say, if you don't get through the issue of identity, however you define yourself, like Citlali just said, then it's hard identifying what your goals are and what the trajectory of that. And that's why I invited Citlali on the show today. But a few things happened in the last few weeks. One, critical race theory. And Citlali just showed a book by Christina Mora from UC Berkeley. There's Laura Gomez and a lot of books. And that's some would call it Chicano critical race theory, Latino critical race theory. But at the core of the identity issue, if you are listening to this show, is that critical race theory. Because without it, you're not understanding what Citlali is saying about the issue of identity. And what's interesting is that Republicans have said they don't want folks to teach it in the schools. So I'll get to that question. I want you to react. Why are Republicans so afraid of critical race theory, specifically for Mexican populations? Why they are so afraid? And also, I want to talk about the young man who, I've never seen so many Mexican flags being waved all over the place in high school. And for those who want this Latino identity, they're shocked at why you're having so many folks wave the Mexican flag. And does that Mexican flag mean the Mexican government? Or is it more of a Mexican U.S. or Chicano identity? So, Citla.
Yes, well, I saw that video as well as you did, Gabriel, and I was so proud of him because there was a point where it looks like the administrator asked him to take it off, and he didn't. The crowd was telling him, no, like, telling him to keep it on. And so to me, him walking away, they held his diploma. I think it's a symbolism, right? We have a young brown man who is graduating high school. So those of us who know, we follow the educational Chicano pipeline, that in itself is a huge accomplishment for our community. We don't know if he was first generation graduate, in his family. And so the representation of him having the Mexican flag, him crossing the stage, obtaining his diploma, which he wanted to do, I think that shows that's the fear that a lot of white racists, a lot of even brown racists have, because it's a symbol of an educated Mexican, a young Mexican who's to be the future of this country. And I think the paranoia, the fear is that they feel threatened by Mexican culture, by all these flags. It could have been a Puerto Rican flag, it could have been a Salvadorian flag, an Hondureño flag. I'm sure he would have received the same response. But because the way that Mexican identity is racialized, the way Trump obviously used anti-Mexican sentiments, and for him to be able to do that, and all these young people that are doing this, that's their form of resistance. That's the form for them to say, I'm proud of who I am. I've made it to this far. I'm proud of being a graduate. And that's the way that they're using it to respond, right? Because this is a generation that survived Trump. This is a generation that saw hate crimes against Mexicans rise up through the roof under Trump. So the psychological effects that has on our youth, I can see that in the way that they're saying, yeah, I am Mexican. And I've seen there's been a spark of this, proud of being Mexican is that has really, increased in the last 5-6 years. And it's beautiful to see because that's how youth are reacting. They don't have political power. They're not probably involved in community yet, but these are the ways that they're showing expression with who they are. And that's threatening this whole white narrative that he's not carrying an American flag, that he has a right to carry that Mexican flag. He has a freedom of speech. He has the pride. And if we are a country of diversity and everyone's included and we have this narrative, then he should be allowed, and every young person should be allowed to display that and say, I am proud Mexican, I'm proud Salvadorian, and I'm going to get my degree. And he's going to go on to do beautiful things. And so to me, the symbolism is what matters here. Whatever they just saw, oh, that flag represents Mexico. We hate Mexicans. Mexicans are A, B, C, and D, and that could go that narrative. But he's reclaiming the narrative. He's reclaiming what it means to be Mexican.
And for some looking at it, they'll say, oh, why is the Mexican flag always up? And and they get really out, bent out of shape. Do you think that he in raising the Mexican flag? Do you think it was an issue of him saying, hey, I'm representing the Mexican government and the geographic area called Mexico, and Andrés López Obrador is my president? Was he saying that, or what was he saying? What help viewers understand what the Mexican flag represented for the young men?
Again, I sorry, Everett, if you ever watch this, I'm gonna take on your narrative and I'm gonna assume these things, right?
I'm trying to interview him, by the way.
Awesome. Yes. To me, the Mexican flag, to him, I think it represents his family. It represents a culture that he has witnessed that has been trampled on by we're looking at this culture of the US, the culture that is post-Trump, so there's a lot of healing that we have to do. So to me, he saw it as, my parents are Mexican, they're proud of me. I want them to know that I'm not forgetting who I am. I want everyone that's watching me, my little brothers, perhaps, my little cousins, perhaps. I don't want them to be ashamed of who they are. I want them to know that they can be who they are and still succeed in life. You can be Mexican, celebrate who you are, still get your high school diploma, still get your master's, your PhD. I think that is the strongest message. Perhaps he's not going to articulate that, but that's how I see it. I put myself in his position. How would I have felt at that time surviving Trump? I survived 187 and Wilson, and I was traumatized. I cannot imagine what our youth are going through surviving Trump. So to me, it was his way of reclaiming, of being proud of his family, of being proud of who he is, but also sending a message to the youth. Maybe he's not thinking nationally. Maybe he was just doing it, his little cousins, his little brothers. It's not a cool thing to be Mexican. There's a lot of racism still. There's a lot of anti-Mexicanness going on. So to me, it was a way of him taking back that control, that power, and saying, this is who I am. I'm proud of who I am, and I'm succeeding as the person that I am.
Should and it almost feels, and I know we're not doing this, but it almost feels as though we have to explain ourselves or apologize, for him, waving the Mexican flag, where some states are still represented by the Confederate flag, and the Mexican flag never attempted to take over the United States the way the Confederate flag did. But tell me why Republicans are so afraid of critical race theory being taught to Mexican, Central American, South American kids. Why are they so afraid?
I think at the end of their night and their paranoia is the fact that critical race theory exposes how institutions and systems have been intentionally used to empower certain ethnicities, certain races. And I think it's going to expose white supremacy. It's going to show the truth of how powers worked, what the injustices that have occurred, what people have suffered. And I think a lot of a lot of white people are afraid because they feel like they like to believe that they've worked hard for their privilege, that they're not racist themselves, that they have no benefits, that everything they have, they worked on their own. And so I think critical race theory really takes that apart and really deconstructs the way these systems have benefited, a lot of white Americans and have put us on a lot of disadvantages. And I think it shows the purposeful and that it's been intentional. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something that was just, accidentally produced institutional racism or accidentally produced environmental racism or all these isms within the system. And I think it exposes that. And I think a lot of, in the majority, not all white people, but in the majority, there's this sense that they're going to be exposed and they're not ready to speak about racism without feeling personally attacked. And I think that's a challenge that they have to understand. It's a system that they are born into, just like a system of poverty that we are born into. Many of them are born into privilege. They're born into access. They're born into education, inheritance. So it's a conversation that must be had, especially after Black Lives Matter, all the marches and protests of last year. I think it's only fair for the rest of the population to finally start taking this approach to education. And again, I think the biggest fear is feeling that they're going to feel like, wow, like even there. And I think a lot of the time, let me take that back. I think a lot of the times they don't even know, right? Their own history. They don't even know the specifics, policies of what happened, what took place that led up to this white privilege and this white supremacy. So I think it's a fear of not knowing, a fear of their own participation perhaps in what has happened. And to me, it's like if a lot of white people that I've met, they're very open-minded. They want to know. They want their kids to know. And I think in any free society that you want to move on, that you want to heal from centuries of racism, of discrimination, the most important thing to do is to have a conversation. And if you can have that conversation openly in an educational space and be able to talk about the institutions, the laws, the policies, everything that took place to bring what we have today as powerful in the narrative, then I think that's important to have. But I think the biggest fear is that all these brown and Black people are, if they're going to know what really happened, they're going to be really mad at me. And what am I going to do? And I think they're looking at it completely wrong. They should be open-minded to this. They should be like, well, I've been lied to as well, because white people have also been lied to. White supremacy is an illusion. White supremacy results in a lot of, mental illnesses, mental health problems for a lot of white folks. People don't talk about that. Right. So I think it's a dismantling, and it's an opportunity for them to really participate in their own education. And I think that's a challenge and it's a threat. And adding to the demographics, like you said, Gabriel, you're looking at this country that's becoming brown, that's becoming more people of color, and then you're talking about critical race theory. To them, they're overwhelmed. A lot of them are overwhelmed. And I think that's the lack of education. I think it's ignorance. And it's also because these institutions have refused to talk about race, have refused to talk about power and white supremacy in a way that's constructive, in a way that's positive for everybody. It's not a bad thing to learn about race. That's not a bad thing. It liberates us. It liberates judgments and prejudice. It's a beautiful opportunity, but not everyone sees it like that.
So in a topic that won't take us for 2 minutes, talk about the concept of blood quantumness that you brought up and how that affects our communities. It's a new term that you use in one of your videos. Tell us about it. Then you're going to get the last word.
Thank you. Well, what I was referring to is mestizaje. The concept of mestizaje is an ideology of power that was produced by the Mexican government after the Mexican Revolution as a way to flatten the resistance of indigenous and Black populations. They didn't want to accept that the indigenous population was still powerful, was still resisting, and it's a way to widen up the population. This happened in other countries like Argentina, also had this. Brazil also had this. So this whole idea of blood quantum leads us to this obsession with whiteness, claiming a Spanish grandfather, and completely participating in colorism in our communities, which leads to the discrimination that we have laterally against ourselves. And you see that in mainstream media, especially Spanish-speaking media.
So a last point, and then you'll close up, even though I said that the other one was going to be last. Use Mexican, but you don't use Chicana or Chicano a lot in your. What was your decision? Why don't we finish up with this one? What was your decision not to use Chicano or versus Mexican? What's your relationship with the terms?
Well, Chicano, I respect everyone that uses the term, but I myself, when I learned the history of the word Chicano and how it came from Mexicano, to me was like, if we're already saying Mexicano, let me just call myself Mexican. I myself personally call myself an indigenous person because I try to decolonize from all the other settler terms. But as far as the term Chicano, I think it's a powerful identity that was created in resistance in the 70s and 80s. But myself, I think Mexican and my own term and use is closer to the indigenous ancestry and heritage that I am embracing.
Thank you very much. So viewers, you've met Citlali on TikTok. Visit her YouTube show, Mexican Excellence, on her TikTok. Press the little heart button. The conversation today was about identity, and this is going to be just one of a few conversations with Citlali. Put a comment down there. We want to answer your questions. Again, this is an ongoing conversation. But today I want to thank Citlali Anahuac. Thank you very much for your time. Welcome to BuelnaNews, and we're looking forward to having you back.
Thank you, Gabriel.